So any person that has been successful or has become a millionaire uses something called Pareto principle. And so Pareto principle, you guys have probably heard about this before. To be honest, nothing special. Is nothing more than 20-80 or 80-20, depending on how you want to see it. So what that means is essentially 20% of the input yields 80% of the outcome. And so what business do, in most of the decisions, they try to optimize or at least search and evaluate and figure out what the 20% actually is, so that it actually results to that 80% of the output. And so I want you guys to understand that why this principle has not only existed for hundreds of years, but also why it has made a lot of people successful. And the reason is because it uses or leverages something called asymmetries. And so asymmetries, mathematically speaking, is a specific equation that doesn't really make sense. Like if you're good in algebra or geometry, you can probably understand what I'm trying to say here. But the point is that asymmetrical means that there's some type of multiplier, right? So through a specific input, there is a specific process that goes on, and the output is just multiplied, very often exponentially. And so we can see asymmetries in linear versus exponential graphs. You guys have probably learned this in economics or even in maths as well. So a linear graph is something like this. We have the x and y axis. And an exponential graph is something like this. And so for a lot of businesses out there that become very successful, they understand this principle, the asymmetries and the Pareto principle. And so, for example, if you start a business on, I don't know, a social media marketing agency or clothing brand, then your desired outcome will always be a result of an exponential input, right, that yield a specific outcome that you so desire. And the issue is that around this range, not a lot of stuff happens. And in fact, that's where 99% of the people either don't do the business anymore or they just give up. And that's statistically speaking the truth. And so what you have to understand here is two stuff. Number one is you have to be patient. For a lot of people, they become instantly gratified, right? Or in other words, shiny object syndrome. Shiny object syndrome, SOS, or instant gratification. And the issue is, because of these two stuff, instant gratification and shiny object syndrome, a lot of people just step out at this stage. Because these two principles mean that just because you don't see a result that happens now, you have a tendency to start something different or start something new, or you just don't believe that it will be successful. And the sad reality is that a lot of people fall for these two principles, right? And it's mainly, what I personally believe, is because they don't understand how these asymmetries work. Excuse me. And so in this video, a very brief one, we're going to basically talk what asymmetry is and basically how that looks like. And so in very simple terms, asymmetry is the Pareto principle. And so I won't go too mathematically on it, but Pareto principle, and there are many other principles, asymmetries can be 10-90 or even 100, it can be 40-60. Asymmetry basically means there is some unbalanced equation in a logical sequence where a specific input doesn't balance out the output. So something like 50-50 or 40-40. Now, there are asymmetries in many areas in your life, right? Even like all these feminists argue that there are asymmetries in the workforce, that more males dominate certain fields or the other way around. And so that is indeed an example of asymmetry. But for this video, it's not the point. Now, if you would like to become successful and rich and have all these great materialistic things in life, sure, whatever you're into, then I want you guys to understand that from now on, most of your decision-making processes should resolve around asymmetries. And how that practically looks like is just use Pareto principle for an example and basically figure out the 20% of the things that yield 80% of the output. And if you can't find that, then my advice is to look at the results you have already, right? If you're running a business already, you probably have your revenue numbers, you have your sales, and you can already look at your results and figure out through the data what were the stuff that led to those results. And because we live in the gracious modern world of data, right, there's basically data all over. So you can basically reverse engineer your results and mathematically compute and figure out what were the 20%, or in other words, the strongest customers, the strongest client base that yielded the majority of the outcome. And so if you're still unsure how to do that specifically because you're not good at maths or, I don't know, solving problems, that's absolutely fine. Honestly, just use ChatGPT. Because ChatGPT understands the concept and honestly, it will do it automatically for you. In fact, most of my decision-making processes that involves finances, budgeting, marketing, or specific output of data, I'll always not use ChatGPT per se, but always optimize the strategy and technique, specifically the Pareto principle. And if I can't figure it out myself, I'll just leverage on AI. I mean, that's what it's there for, right? And so with that being said, figure out what the asymmetries are, understand Pareto principle, figure out what that 20% is that, you know, yields 80% of the outcome. And if you still can't figure out, use ChatGPT. That's all. Bye.